All right, I think that's everyone we're expecting then. So I'll go ahead and call our Community Development Committee meeting to order. It is 6:30 p.m. In consideration of the COVID-19 social distancing recommendations, this meeting is being held virtually via Zoom. The public may participate with comments by using the chat feature. Please note that all statements are visible to the group. Information will be posted on the website about how to join, and contact administrative services at offices at 913-676-8350 with any questions or concerns. Let's see. And then tonight we do not have any public hearings or public presentations, and so we will move straight into our action items. Our first action item is the acceptance of the Community Development Committee minutes from Audrey McClanahan.
Thank you. Yes, so these are the January 6, 2021 Community Development Committee minutes for your consideration. Thank you.
Recommend acceptance.
Second.
Okay. All right, everyone go with that. We'll move on to our second item, which is continuation of missions branded signage conversation for the wayfinding plan with Penn Almoney.
Good evening, Mayor and Council.
Hello.
There's considerable familiarity with this action item. We've been discussing it for a few months now. Just as a quick review, this was initiated as a discussion item in October 2020. The current iteration includes replacement of existing branded mission signage, installation of new versions of internal wayfinding signage that could be potentially secured below stop signs and other key intersections, and then the inclusion of park monument signage, which would be at the entrance of each of our parks. So an inventory was done throughout the entire community and was detailed in the action item by number, and then the cost that we received from 3 separate vendors for the replacement fee. Staff then reviewed each of these locations, as well as the locations for additional amenities, reviewed each of those with the Parks, Recreation, and Tree Commission, and then internal discussions began with Public Works as well as Parks and Recreation to fine-tune some of those locations and discuss whether those would be separately on individual posts or potentially included on stop signs. Bids were secured from 3 separate vendors for these new wayfinding images. Image 360, Sign Pro, as well as Midtown Signs, each bid on them. And for 19 total signs, Image 360 was at $9,688. Sign Pro came in at $3,800, and Midtown Signs came in at $7,218.47. Each of the signs were designed from input by Parks and Recreation staff, and then ultimately different iterations were reviewed from Crux, presented to you at the last discussion meeting, and were included at the bottom of this action item. Park monument signage was also included as part of this action item. We solicited bids from 3 separate vendors, Excel LNS, KC Signco, as well as Luminous. Excel LNS was the lowest bidder at $61,040, followed by Luminous at $65,750.78, and then KC Sign Company at $86,049.39. The interesting thing about these revised bids is that initially we had gotten bids for 5 park monument entrance signs, but because of the modification in the look and design of the monuments, we were able to include 3 smaller versions for a total of 8 monument signs, roughly at the same cost as the original 5. So significant cost savings there. We discussed that the PRT had not reached consensus on the design options. However, it was pretty split. We presented that as a discussion item last month. And then council proposed that we move forward on the concept 3 with a 60-40 blue split, white split, as opposed to the initial 50-50, which is also detailed at the bottom of the action item. So staff is recommending that we move forward in replacing existing mission signage with updated versions, as well as purchasing new internal wayfinding signage and park entrance monument signs in an amount not to exceed $70,430.83, which is being funded by the Parks and Recreation sales tax, and of which is below the $80,000, which was originally budgeted.
Thank you, Penn. Any questions for Penn this go around?
Yeah, I have.
Penn?
Penn, I sent you an email. I don't know if you had a chance to see that
I did not.
with some questions. Well, let me just tell you the questions. Don't worry. The first one was having to do with the Tree City sign. Isn't that something that's furnished by Arbor Day Foundation?
Correct.
Okay, so those are not part of this proposal, or is that the cost of the Arbor Day Foundation?
That would be the cost from Arbor Day Foundation to get those replaced.
Okay,
You may have noticed some of Mission's Arbor Day Foundation signs are bent from limbs falling on them, things along those scratches
right,
from vehicles. That's what it would cost to get those replaced.
okay. The second question that I had was, there's the trail that goes from basically the city hall over to where the market area is, you know, that walking trail.
Yes.
That gets pretty littered during, during various times. And I was wondering if we would have something to adopt a trail sign, not that it's part of this, but there might be some interest in adopting a trail as opposed to just adopting a street.
And adopting a park, right?
And adopting a park, yes.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. In fact, we had to discuss that initially as part of the Adopt a Park program and had not gotten any interest on the Adopt a Trail element, but absolutely. If we can actually pitch that if council is open to it, but certainly on the park side, we're more than happy to get an Adopt a Trail program going as well.
Well, I think the trail would be very appropriate at that particular trail is very busy and people walk along it a lot, and it might be a place to start anyway.
Yeah,
So
I agree.
let's see, the final question I had was having to do with the KDOT right away. What's the process for getting an adopt the KDOT right of way? Because Countryside has that strip of parkway that it maintains anyway. We maintain that anyway. And so between that and Millhaven, we might want to find a way to adopt that highway right away, at least in sections. So I didn't know if there was a procedure to do that, or who would we contact for that?
Yeah, I've got the contact of a couple KDOT engineers, so I can find out that information.
Okay.
And are you looking for more of a formalized adopt a?
Well,
Some-
we're going ahead and maintaining that area anyway, so it was a matter of maybe taking credit for it.
Okay, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I will reach out to them and get a response back for you.
Okay, thank you. Those are my questions on that.
All right. Any other questions, comments for Penn?
I had a quick one, Sollie.
Yeah, Trent?
Hey, Penn, just wanted to say I appreciate the savings here realized across multiple vendors and especially coming in under budget. That's nice. I was just looking at the 4x2 and the 8x3 signs, and those look pretty good too. I did just have a question, in the event a park name ever were to change, how, would the signs be easily able to be replaced, updating the new park name, or just if you could kind of speak to that process a little bit.
You bet. My understanding is that these are fabricated front sides, and then each side is tied into the other side. So although it's not easy, it would be relatively easy to take that front portion off and the back portion off. It wouldn't affect the base at all. I'm not sure how they're actually tied in. I know it's not steel, so it's not going to be welded or anything. I would imagine it's some kind of adhesive that gets the sides attached to the front and back. So we could certainly do that. And for the short term, I know we've been discussing Mohawk Park potential renaming. That would obviously be one of the last signs that we would get fabricated. So hopefully we'll have a solution to that.
All right, anything else from anyone? Not, I would entertain a recommendation.
I recommend that we move it to council on consent.
Everyone
Second.
good with that? All right. Thank you, Penn.
Thank you.
Our third action item is renewal of the Crux contract for communications and marketing. Emily Randel.
Yes, thank you. And I'd like to just follow Penn's lead with bringing a discussion item back to you again. That's very familiar. Following our presentation in January, where we discussed the renewal of the Crux Communications and Marketing Contract, I'd like to present it this time as an action item for your consideration at the City Council meeting. We did hear good feedback as a result of our discussions in January last month, and we're working to incorporate those ideas into the scope and process that's included in the second year of the contract, should it be approved. As a reminder, again, we'd be switching from, and again, I should say the presentation I provided in January was included again in the packet, as well as a new snapshot dashboard of our Google Analytics and the tracking to kind of highlight and forecast a little bit of the tracking and maneuvering that we would anticipate doing with a more solid marketing hat on in the second year phasing. So we're definitely pivoting from research, design, and implementation and updating in year one to a much more targeted marketing strategy in year two. That is proposed at an amount of $60,000, which represents 50 hours a month worth of services at $100 per hour, which is a reduction from the cost of the first year's hourly rate. So I can take questions, but again, if the contract would be approved at the City Council meeting, launch into work, we also would like to offer each member of the City Council and the mayor a one-on-one meeting, just because we want to specifically align to the goals of this contract, and we'll be setting those very intentionally at the start of the contract year. So that would be an invitation we'd be extending to you right away at the beginning of that contract. And we'll also be prepared to announce a launch date for the new website at our City Council meeting in February. We're working to get closer so that we can hit that target, but we'll be ready to announce what that target is at that meeting so that everybody can start to anticipate that as well.
Great. Thank you, Emily. Any questions for Emily? Yeah, Debbie?
I have a question. Emily, have we had any feedback either in writing on the website or our Facebook page about the logo and any other of the communication details that we've come to conclusion on at this point in time?
Yes, we haven't done seeking out any formal feedback, haven't done a survey or anything to that nature, but anecdotally, I feel like I've received a lot of compliments from our partners, I would say, and people who are using it a lot, especially as we were reaching out to announce it and things like that. We did hear good feedback. So feeling good about it in that respect, but we haven't done any official surveying, so to speak.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
I actually have one question, Emily, that I don't think we've covered before, but we're looking at downward revenues out of decreased use of services during COVID times, like during the community center, some of our other program offerings. Have we talked to Crux at all, or do they have, a strategy with different cities or other businesses they're working on in terms of incorporating, post-COVID recovery elements, or is that something we'd be discussing with them as well? Sort of rebounding from COVID times.
Sure. Well, so I don't know for sure if this is what you mean, but well, what do you mean? I'm not sure.
I guess I didn't know if maybe they've already previewed, if they've been thinking about these types of things, because obviously we're not, unique in having, decreased customers or, things like that due to COVID. And so I was just wondering if that had been part of the discussions yet. I was just curious. But
the one thing that's comment or questions making me think of is the strategy related to the community center, and I guess laying in wait is a good idea for, you don't want to throw everything that you have at the goal right now, and people, if they have misgivings or they don't feel comfortable, even with the safety precautions that are in place, all of the emails in the world may not change their mind. And so sort of starting to, I think they're very much in the camp of doing what we can now, building relationships now, expanding membership reach, creating the environment for contact now. Now's the time to grow your lists in a thoughtful way that's like acknowledging where people really are.
Okay.
And as soon as it's go time, it's
we'll be ready.
Your audience built in, I think.
Great.
Sollie?
Yeah, Ken, and then
Yeah,
Trent.
I have a comment. I just want to say it's really amazing the amount of work that they have done and you have done this past year. It's very impressive when you look through all the elements of what's been accomplished and what there's yet to do. And I think that this is very well a good investment in the coming years. So I definitely support this and would recommend that we move it forward.
Thank you.
Yeah, Trent, did you have a question or comment?
Yeah, just a quick one for Emily. And I'm not a marketing expert, so there may be a very good reason why this isn't something that Crux has formally proposed. But I did kind of talk with their team when we were first starting out here, and I would just be curious if you could ask them about text alerts, if that's even a feasible option. Maybe it's not. And if that's the case, then I'll kindly mute myself and move on. But I did think that might be a unique way to reach folks, just as that's becoming a more common way of communicating, that, even the quick, like, hey, this week we're talking about this at council, boom, for the folks who want to opt in. Just an idea, something I wouldn't mind you just at least kind of asking them about if the time allows.
Yeah, that's great. We have done the text alerts for the market for many years with good success. It hasn't been a list that's expanded exponentially, but it also isn't one that we see people unsubscribing to. And I think it's commonly known that people's open rate for text messages is much higher than it is for any email that lands in our inbox. So we do think it's definitely an attractive option, and we already have the capability through the channel, the Notify Joco system that we pay into already. It's what we've used for the market in the last years. So definitely feasible. I will say, I think that falls right in line. The reason probably it hasn't been suggested to date is I think it falls right in line with some of the more marketing and strategizing that we're talking about doing, and that every page, every highlighted page on our website has a call to action in the makeup of the page, and that is a subscribe, or that is a follow, or that is, those kinds of building the audience messaging. So I think that would be really well incorporated into that plan. So I think it's just, I think it's on the list, but not executed yet quite.
Great. Any other questions for Emily? Or if not, I would entertain a recommendation.
I'd recommend that we take it to council on consent agenda.
Second.
Everyone good with that? All right. Thank you, Emily.
Thanks.
Our fourth item tonight is the contract for the inspection and inventory of bridges in Mission with Brent Morton.
Thank you very much. This is our biannual bridge inspection. The last time we went through this was 2019. This is a requirement by KDOT to inspect every bridge in the city limits that's over 20 feet. We have a total of 9 bridges in Mission. It's on the packet, a list of our 9 bridges. GBA has done this work for us probably for the last 12 years, I would say, on a biannual rate. They are pre-qualified through KDOT as an inspection service that can do this work and upload that information to the KDOT portal, which is required now. Used to be paper copies. Now there's a portal where you got to be kind of use it more often than not to understand their portal and how the inspection process works and how to upload that information so you don't get audited every 2 years. The scope of the work includes an on-site inspection, data uploaded into the KDOT portal like I was talking about, a report and a summary that is handed back to me and Celia, and then also made available to council or anybody that would like to see a copy of it. And then they also are on call or at our disposal for any problems that come through the portal that KDOT might, if something didn't go through the portal right, or there's a low rated bridge that we need to address sooner than later, and KDOT comes out to audit us, GBA is on our side to make sure, we cross all our T's and we're doing what we're supposed to do to keep those bridges in the shape that they're drivable and safe to the traveling public. The scale is a 0 to 9. A 0 is a failed bridge that's undrivable. Basically, you've closed the road or it's collapsed on itself. A 9 is a new bridge. All our bridges are in pretty good shape. I was looking over the 19 inspection report today. The one on Reed's Road, which I think all you guys were here last in 19, but they recommended some repairs. We did make those in 19. That bridge is rated at a 6 or a 6 point something. So I'm anxious to see where the ratings came back on this year when they look at it again, since we made those repairs. Once it starts dropping below a 6, GBA or KDOT will start recommending either major repairs or replacement of the bridge. So it's good to have these every 2 years. They see stuff we don't. They know how to knock on concrete and make sure there's no voids or it's not falling apart from the inside out. So I think it's worth the money for sure. So we're recommending approval with George Butler and Associates for amount not to exceed $8,900. And that price has gone down from 2019. In 2019, we had some other stuff going on in town on Outlook and under the Gateway site. So I had them look at those box culverts and then also some of those creek channel walls that are moving. I believe the information they gave us in 19 is still good information. So I don't think it's worth inspecting it again until, we have a solution to some of those issues. So we're just looking at the bridges this year in 2021. And if you have any, answer any questions.
All right. Any questions for Brent?
Sollie?
Yeah, Ken?
Yeah, Brent asked this last time, I believe. I know that these smaller bridges that are not included in this roster, such as a couple of bridges on 61st Terrace and 62nd Terrace, are not included. I had asked you how those get inspected or made sure that they are secure. Is that part of the street program?
I would say it's a combination of the street program and our stream inventory we just did. So when they're looking at the streams, they're also looking at those box culverts that run under those roads. So, I mean, you'd look at them as they come up with the street program to see if, if there's problem with the boxes and we need to replace them. But also when we do those stream inspections, probably every couple of years now, they're also looking at when they walk under those creek channels, seeing if those boxes are in good shapes and all the pipes that are dumping through into those creek channels.
Thank you. That's what I needed to know.
They don't get missed.
Any other questions for Brent on this one? If not, I'd entertain a recommendation.
I recommend that we take this to council on consent.
Second.
Sounds good. Thank you, Brent.
Thank you very much.
And we have one more action item tonight. That is the wall mural guidelines and application process. Brian Scott.
Brian, you're muted.
There we go. Can you hear me now?
Yep,
Okay. Can everybody see the screen?
yep.
Okay, I'll start over. This item was brought to you in January. Got some good feedback at that time. And I believe there's some questions that were submitted to the city administrator recently. So I will go through and try to answer those questions, then highlight the changes that were made based on the feedback from the meeting last time. Under design standards, one of the questions was this section that was added by our city attorney, Pete Heaven. Mural shall not contain material that is protected under copyright law unless permission has been granted. Actually, that's the wrong line. Let me go to the next one here. Mural shall not incorporate anything that would be considered inappropriate and or indecent by contemporary community standards. And one of the committee members had asked last time if we could provide some examples of what would be considered indecent. And as I thought, Pete advised against doing that. This is language is taken directly from case law. And if we start to add examples, we might be kind of deviating a little bit from that. It's a little bit of kind of, I'll know it's obscene when I see it. So he really just kind of wanted the courts to make that determination to leave the language as it is from case law. So his recommendation is to leave it as is. There was a comment last time about murals shall not be permitted in residentially zoned areas of the city. I removed this. And then there was a provision in the first draft about limiting the size of the mural on the wall. So it's proportional to the building size. I removed this at the suggestion of the committee. Under requirements for mural application, I did add a provision, signed letters of support or a signed petition of support from surrounding property owners of the proposed mural. And this was a little bit in response to removing the provision of not allowing murals in residential areas. I saw the provision as in another standards I was looking at from another city. And I thought it'd be a good idea to add that here. And it's a little bit of that trigger that if somebody's going to want to paint a mural on the side of their building, they should at least go visit with their neighbors. And that would especially be true in residential areas. As I could very easily see a situation where somebody makes an application for a mural, we review it, we give it to the planning commission, they approve it, and then somebody calls City Hall and says, my neighbor just painted a mural of a watermelon on the side of the house, and I didn't know anything about it. And I was wondering who approved that. And so this is kind of an opportunity to sort of catch that a little bit ahead of the application process and allow the applicant to try to at least engage their neighbors in some conversation about what they're proposing. And then we required a written maintenance plan for the ongoing care and preservation of the mural. And then we kind of beefed this up a little bit in the ongoing maintenance of the mural section by simply stating the applicant will be required to file a maintenance plan with the application, and that this will be kept on file. Then failure to comply with the plan may result in the removal of the mural at the applicant's cost. And then finally, we added some language around the review of the application, completing the application and submitting that to the Community Development Department at the City Hall, having staff review this for initial comments and feedback, and then submitting this to the Planning Commission for their consideration. There was a question that was submitted to the city administrator regarding what would happen if the planning commission denied the application? Would there be an appeals process? We could certainly add something with appeal maybe to the city council, if that would be the desire of the committee. Typically with zoning matters, although we're trying to kind of keep this out of the zoning ordinance, with the zoning matters, unless it's specifically stated in the zoning code, any appeal of a denial by the planning commission would actually go to circuit court. Probably a little heavy-handed. But if you'd like to have an appeal process to the city council, we can certainly add that in here.
Brian, what's the role of the BZA?
The BZA is strictly land use matters. So they're going to be, it's a very stipulated set of requirements in the state statutes. And it pertains just to land use matters.
Brian, I had a couple questions, even with the revisions, and thank you for those. On the design standards, I just wanted to clarify, the prohibition on commercial text, that would still allow for, artistic text or, graffiti type styling, as long as it wasn't commercial in nature, an ad for a business that looks like a business sign disguised as a mural, et cetera. Is that right?
Right. If somebody wants to paint a Campbell soup can, kind of like Andy Warhol, that'd be permitted. But if somebody wants to say, buy your hot dog here, that would not be permitted.
Okay. And then I had a question on the maintenance requirement. I like that being a requirement and making them put that in the application, but I did notice that there's nothing in there about a requirement to keep it in good repair. So I was just going to recommend that we add some language about that, maybe before that last sentence about failure to comply. I think it's in the resolution and in the actual application, but because we're saying that they have to make it, have measures to make it less prone to vandalism. They have to have a plan for, protecting the mural from the environment, but it doesn't actually say that they have to keep it in good repair. And so I was just recommending a sentence in both the resolution and on the application that, they're required to keep it in good repair, and the failure to keep it in good repair is what would result in that removal.
And I think that's clear. It's clearer in the actual guidelines. So in the ongoing maintenance of the mural, the first sentence, the applicant will be responsible for ensuring that the mural is maintained in good condition.
Yeah.
So probably just transferring that same language. Is that in
the
resolution and the application?
Yeah, I think that makes sense. That way, because, some people are going to be better at reading thoroughly the resolution than others when they go to apply. So I think, making that really clear that that's the expectation, so that we don't have people upset when, their mural is crumbling and we're saying, no, it has to come down.
Yeah, I thought that was kind of inferred, but I'll beef it up a little bit.
Hey, Brian.
Yep.
This is
Kristen and Hillary.
I strongly oppose having this in residential zone properties. So can you tell me a little bit about what that process would be if somebody did go ahead and, wanted to put a watermelon on the side of their house? Are they supposed to go ahead and go to the city first? And then all the neighbors would be petitioned, or just, give me some clarity on that, please. Thank you.
Well, let me jump in, because I we had a really sort of tangled conversation about this last month. I thought we landed on prohibiting them in residential areas. And we were having a conversation around, did we want to specifically say that or not? And I think I was suggesting, and so I apologize, I didn't catch this, but I feel like where we landed at the last committee meeting was that they would be prohibited in residential areas.
Yeah, Laura, I think
And
that
I did
is.
too.
I think that is what we concluded last time. I think maybe the only remaining point of confusion was how we would handle like mixed use or apartment areas. But if residential is defined differently in the code, then it's probably clear enough to keep that back in.
Well, yeah, I'll just remove this, this deletion, then put it back in.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. Thank you so much.
And then Hillary, did you have a question?
I did. Thank you, Brian, for making all these updates. Comment in that I like the idea of having an appeals process to the council. I think that makes sense. And then my other thought is just wondering about any grandfathered in language, if that's something worthy to have in relation to the current mural or murals that we have in town already, and making sure that we're creating a mechanism for getting those taken care of at what I think is a relevant time.
Yeah, and I would maybe even add to that even more than just straight grandfathering them in. Are we going to send them something that's an expectation that, you know, existing murals will be in good repair as well?
Maybe it's just a quick idea. Maybe existing murals in town, you know, instead of an application, they just create a maintenance plan, and immediately their maintenance plan wouldn't follow our rules, right? Just a thought.
Yeah, I think they might be challenged to have a maintenance plan that would comply with these guidelines. You know, typically with grandfathering, you kind of, it's almost like non-conforming uses. You say, well, we'll go ahead and allow these in as they are. And then over time, as they make changes or update, then they have to apply to the new guidelines. With one particular business, I don't think we want that to be the case. They will need to clean up their mural, basically.
So
Right,
maybe
but
putting in
what-
some
what can
language
we
around
do?
that.
Right.
Yeah.
So what can we do in this language to, you know, then take to them and say, we put this in, you need to follow suit, even though, you know what I mean?
Well, I think that's why I was a little bit silent on the grandfathering provision. Really, at this point, they're almost in violation of the maintenance of their building. And so we need to approach them and say, either you paint the wall a solid color, or if you want to have a new mural or update your mural, that's fine. Here are the guidelines.
So
Okay.
could we give them a time frame to come into compliance?
Yeah, they're not going to be able to do any kind of painting in this weather.
Yeah.
But I think if we gave them like a 6-month grace period or something like that, they should be able to come up with some resolution in that time period.
That makes sense.
Sollie had a question too.
Sorry, is that Trent?
Yeah.
Yep.
Did we have, so kind of on the heels of that discussion, you know, is there any idea of, you know, setting up like a review, like every 5 years or something, the city would just kind of touch base with the owners and make sure they're, you know, in compliance and everything? Or is the onus just going to be on the developer to make sure that, or on the owner to just make sure they're following this, and it's just kind of an indefinite thing the city keeps in the back of its mind?
Probably the latter. That was something that was suggested by the Planning Commission. I was a little bit reluctant to do that because there's a tracking mechanism on the part of staff.
Yeah.
And if we fall out of compliance with that tracking system, then frankly, a kind of egg on our face. So it was more of kind of, it's the onus is upon the applicant to keep that mural up to date. And if we receive a complaint or we happen to notice that the mural is starting to not look good, then at that point, we can go back to this maintenance agreement that should be on file with the city and say, you need to comply with this maintenance agreement.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. Just was curious about that.
I had one other question and just a comment. I would second Hillary that I'd like to see a mechanism for appeal to council out of the planning commission. And then my last question, and maybe it's partially resolved by the residential piece, but is those letters of support, you know, are they going to be required that everyone around you wants your mural, or is the intent just really more of a certification that you've spoken to everyone around you? And, you know, is this either side of you or also across the street and behind? You know, I like the idea of having the conversations, but I'm not sure, especially if it's limited to the business district, if your, you know, neighbor should get to veto what you want to do now that this is a part of our code.
Yeah, I wouldn't, I don't think I'd necessarily make it a requirement. But again, it would be something that would be submitted with the application. And if they don't have it, I think it would kind of draw attention to it during the consideration by the planning commission.
Okay, so it wouldn't be
So it'd be after some-
required.
Yeah,
that
they would
you
have to
have.
explain why they did not bother to get the signed letters, or why
Okay.
they were not able to obtain a signed letter. I don't think it would necessarily throw out the application completely, but it would be something that they have
Okay.
to explain at the planning commission.
So maybe it should be for the requirement, then I wonder if it should say something more like signed letters of support or indication of opposition, you know, that would just show that they'd have the conversation. But if it's not going to be, you know, a requirement that everyone agrees necessarily.
Probably signed letters of support or signed petition is encouraged.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah.
Sollie,
Yeah, Ken?
wasn't the procedure that they used to get the approval on this mural through letters of support or a petition? Wasn't that the process?
No, we didn't really have any of these guidelines in place. The applicant, you're talking about the headless hands
Yes.
tattoo, yeah, shop. They did a kind of an informal survey on Nextdoor. And so they got a number of favorable comments through that informal survey, and they submitted that to the city.
Okay, thank you.
But that wasn't something that we asked of them at the time.
Okay. Any other questions for Brian? And if not, I'd entertain a recommendation.
Yeah, recommend we take it to council. I don't know if you want to do this on consent or have it more explicit.
Yeah, I think we still have some open questions or revisions.
Okay. Take it to council.
So non-consent, is everyone good with that?
Consent. Yeah.
On hearing.
Non-consent.
Okay. All right, thank you, Brian.
All right, thank you.
And that does conclude our action items, but we do have a discussion item tonight. So that is a discussion of Johnson Drive functionality with Laura Smith.
Yes, thank you. So I think we're all familiar with the fact that for several years, the council has expressed both traffic and pedestrian safety concerns along the Johnson Drive corridor, specifically between Lamar and Knoll Avenues. It's really been a point of discussion since we reconstructed the street and made improvements designed to promote walkability and much more pedestrian interaction with the street back in 2014. And since 2014, we have studied a variety of alternatives. We actually installed a speed table or speed hump at the Johnson Drive Woodson intersection as a part of the project. So we've looked at speed limit, we've looked at speed tables, we've looked at increased enforcement along that section of the corridor. We installed flashing pedestrian beacons with the project. We've discussed crossing guards. We've talked about a hawk signal. which is a pedestrian signal, but it is flashing red and actually it's much more visible, like a red stoplight for motorists. We've talked about and done some minor modification of parking spaces at various intersections to address visibility issues. We talked about making the Johnson Drive and Woodson intersection a 4-way stop. We talked about and then ultimately installed in 2017 a traffic signal back at the Woodson and Johnson Drive intersection that had been removed with the project because the traffic warrant didn't, or the warrant, it wasn't warranted, and we risked losing about $2 million in federal funding if we put the signal in as a part of the project during its original construction. And then we've talked also about reconfiguration of the street from a 4-lane street to a 3-lane configuration. So kind of revive that conversation again in late 2019 and early 2020. We had talked about the street will be due for an intermediate maintenance treatment, which is resurfacing, which is an opportunity for us if we're going to consider any additional changes or modifications to the street, would be the most appropriate time. And that's scheduled in 2022 through the Johnson County CARS program. So as we gear up for that and think about submitting final costs well, let me back up. So we've talked about it, came up again in early 2020. We talked about moving forward to get specific traffic and pedestrian counts. And then obviously with construction of the locale, which dropped a lane of traffic along that section of the corridor in front of that construction project. And then living through and continuing to be in a COVID world, we didn't feel the traffic counts or pedestrian counts would necessarily be accurate. So in August of last year, we came back and presented some crash data and a crash analysis that was done by Olson and Associates. We don't see particularly high crash rates, which is a good thing along this corridor, but it is an important piece of data to look at. So unfortunately, the world has not improved to a point where it makes sense for us to move forward with the traffic counts, but traffic counts that we have seen on Johnson Drive consistently really since 2011 would suggest that really the alternative, kind of the last remaining alternative that we've considered, which is that reconfiguration, the traffic volumes would support that. So in order to meet the CARS submission deadline, we had talked about in August, waiting to see if things got better. And if not, then we would probably move forward to just engage in kind of a public discussion. It's been a very heated, emotional topic over the years, but we have heard a lot of feedback and continue to hear a lot of feedback, not only from the council, but from the public, just along several of those same lines. So what we are proposing this evening, and I shared with you and we'll update it in the packet, are to move forward the end of this week and release 2 separate surveys, one for business and or property owners in that stretch of Johnson Drive, Lamar to Knoll, that would ask questions about the functionality of the street from a driver's perspective, functionality of the street from a pedestrian's perspective, but also to address some questions about parking. Parking along that corridor from the time of the reconstruction has been an important part of the conversation. There was a Johnson Drive parking task force that was convened and made some recommendations several years ago. What we've seen is a change with the addition of the locale and some other businesses along that corridor with parking and parking needs and parking demand. And so as we really look at the functionality of that whole section of the street, we felt it was important to also include some questions about parking in that survey. So one survey, I'll pull the surveys up and screen share here in just a moment, but one survey from the perspective of the business or property owners along that corridor, and then another that's really targeted to just users of the street. So there could be some overlap, but those could be Mission residents, Mission visitors. And that asks a few more questions with respect to why or how people are coming down to that section of Johnson Drive and using that section of the street. So what we'd like to do is get the surveys out, collect that data, also at the same time advertise some dates for some focus groups. Obviously we would be doing those virtually, but we've had success with that as well. So we would ask people to RSVP for probably a series of 3 focus groups the week, I think we're targeting right now the week of February 15th. And then that would give us the opportunity to then compile kind of that focus group data and the survey data and bring that back for the council to review at your March committee meeting, sort of with the goal of moving forward to make sure we're clear and can provide some clarity around what that CARS project will look like and the development and submission of final costs. So I might stop there before I pull up the surveys and take any specific questions, comments, feedback on the surveys. If anybody has anything else they'd like to discuss at this point.
So this is non-survey related questions.
Uh-huh.
Anyone have just general questions for Laura?
Okay, give me a second then. We will look at let's look at the user survey first. Okay. Again, the user survey is, we're looking to gather information about, who are you? Are you a resident? Are you a visitor? Are you an employee of a Mission business? Do you own a Mission business? If you're a Mission resident, how many years have you lived in Mission? Because for some, the only configuration or functionality of the street that they've experienced will be what has been in place since 2014. So that sort of puts us in a time frame with their experience with the street. Then we ask some questions about how many times a month they drive that section of Johnson Drive. And then what's the primary purpose? So are you commuting to and from work? Are you visiting a specific business on Johnson Drive? Is that just the fastest route from home to shopping, church, school, etc.? Or are you attending the Mission Market, a sidewalk sale, other downtown special event, or other? Then we ask questions about, from a driver's perspective, do you feel safe as a driver on Johnson Drive, yes or no? And then what areas of concern do you have as a driver? And actually, I probably need to put none. I realize I didn't add none on here. So we'll add none as an option. But looking at speed, the things that we've heard, both from council conversations and conversations with businesses and members of the public. So vehicle speed, parking sight lines, particularly as you're backing out of a parking space, traffic volumes, is there too much traffic? Pedestrian visibility. So as a driver, can you appropriately see pedestrians when they're in the crosswalk? Jaywalking, cars turning across oncoming lanes of traffic to park, which is something that we still see pretty regularly occurring on Johnson Drive, and then any other. Then we ask the question, do you ever avoid driving on Johnson Drive? If yes, please explain why. Then we kind of we move from your experience as a driver to your experience as a pedestrian. Similar questions, how many times do you walk Johnson Drive? What's your primary purpose for that? Do you feel safe? And then what areas of concern do you have as a pedestrian, if any? And then it's a little bit of an interesting question. What is your perception of traffic volumes through the downtown portion of Johnson Drive pre-COVID? We've had some internal discussions about why would we ask a question about people's perception? Wouldn't we just go get traffic counts? But I think the perception question is important, and it's been an important part of the conversation really for the last 7 or 8 years. And so I think gauging that. We have traffic data. We have traffic data that's a little bit older. But I think it's an interesting way to just sort of gauge what their sense is. So traffic volumes increasing, decreasing, remain relatively constant. What's your most important? And then we kind of move into, if you are a driver and you're looking to park in that corridor, what's your most important consideration when choosing to park? So ease of finding a space, someplace that's close to nearest my intended destination, not having to move my car until I'm going home, security, safety. How far would you be willing to park from a business and walk? That gets at that question of, as we look at protected, or, we have a signalized intersection at Woodson and Johnson Drive, but are people willing to park 2 or 3 blocks away from that and walk to that intersection to cross the street there? Just helps us kind of gauge what that tolerance is. What parking improvements would benefit downtown Mission? And this again kind of came out of some of the work that we did with the parking task force several years ago, getting at some of these similar things, looking at more turnover, so shorter periods of time, more off-street parking, improved off-street parking, improved loading and unloading areas. And then we asked the question, would you be interested in participating in a focus group with other businesses and residents? Would you like to receive updates on the status of the council's conversations regarding the functionality, and then contact information, which is obviously optional. Our thought would be, we've kicked around a whole lot of other questions, and we've heard other things in our conversations with business owners along that corridor related to landscaping and amenities and unloading and unloading and employee parking and all of those kinds of things. We feel like those are, we wanted the survey to be manageable, and we felt as if those were questions that might be more effective in the focus group conversations, that we would be able to sort of flush some of that information out in a little bit more detail. So I'll stop there and take any questions, comments, feedback on the user survey.
Yeah, Laura, I had a couple questions or comments. I know we're mostly looking at a road that is currently primarily for vehicles, but I wondered if, in 15 you have kind of buried in the options, better alternative transportation options, including bicycle racks or better walking conditions. And I was wondering if we should actually maybe consider a separate question about, what walkability improvements would benefit downtown Mission, so that people aren't just thinking about the sort of driving environment, and are instead, thinking about it more holistically as they're answering their questions. And related to the walking piece, as we're looking at a 0-degree week next week, I wondered if in question 8 we should put something in that ties it to the weather, so people are thinking more about, how often are you walking when it's nice out, not when it's February, because I think you might get, deflated numbers. My answer for summer is probably, a lot higher than now. And then I think my last question was on 12, on the perception of traffic volumes. There weren't sort of any time parameters. So is that just like each person's time parameter, like increasing since when or decreasing since when? So I know it would vary because, we have the question about how long have you lived here, and that it would be sort of different from everyone, but I guess is it just if it's generally seems like it's getting busier, or I didn't know if there was a way.
Okay, no, we can go back and look and see if there's a way to sort of incorporate something. So some sort of time parameter to frame that question a little bit more succinctly, I think.
I think that makes sense on number 12. You could maybe even just say since 2014, when Johnson Drive improvements were completed.
Yeah, that would make sense.
Sollie?
Yeah, Ken?
Yeah, I had sent a note to Laura. I don't know if you had a chance to review that, but there were a couple of items that I thought you might want to consider. First of all, the one where it talks about how many times a month do you drive? And then there's another one similar to that in how many times a month do you walk? You might want to just say, how many times do you drive? Leave out a month, because then the following choices then are daily, 1 to 5 times a month, 5 to 10 times a month. Those should be mutually exclusive. So it should be probably either 1 to 4 times a month, or 5 to 10, and then 11 plus, but less than daily. Something to that effect, because you could have the answer daily and 10 times a month be the same. They could be both.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. No, that's a good point.
Let's see, what are the others? I think those are the ones. The other, I didn't know if you wanted to deal with open-ended question at all, in terms of just other comments. And my last suggestion is that you possibly want to pilot this before you send it out. So maybe select a group of people to actually do the survey and see if they have any questions or clarifications that are necessary.
Okay.
All right. Any other questions for Laura?
I had a quick one.
Yeah, Trent?
Laura, is there any value to even having a question on here saying, you know, one of the options available as the city is thinking about Johnson Drive is potentially, you know, reducing one of the driving lanes? You know, would you have any strong feelings either way about this, or somehow asking if that action would change any behavior? Is it worth just being explicit like that at any point?
Or would
I mean,
that be part of the focus groups too?
I think that's probably better in the focus group. You know, I mean, when you look at, and I provided some information that, you know, was sent out in 2017 when we were discussing the installation of the traffic signal, and it had a chart in there that really looked at and laid out the various alternatives that are available to us. And to a certain extent, we've pretty much tried every single one of those, with the exception of, I mean, we discussed pretty seriously the hawk signal for pedestrian crossings, and it was kind of eliminated, I think, at the time because of, you know, the cost of that. We can certainly ask a question, but I might be, so I think a hawk signal, I think reconfiguration of parking spaces in some fashion, but we also know that that's a trigger. And then there are many businesses who have concerns about, you know, the parking in front of or near their, you know, near their locations. So I'd hesitate to probably put one specific alternative on there, and probably address that in a focus group. But certainly, you know, if the council wants to hear specifically how, you know, if we want to put that out there and get the feedback on it, we absolutely could.
I personally think the focus groups make sense. I don't know what you think, Trent.
I only suggested it just because this form would reach the most amount of people, and if we really wanted to get a better idea of kind of the community at large, that might be the better option. But I mean, what you just said makes sense too about the focus group and maybe not putting the cart before the horse. So I'm okay with that approach as well.
Well, I think, you know, because we've talked in the past, and I know the mayor and I have talked extensively about, you know, do we do an education campaign? And I think we even talked about it, I don't know, sometime in the last couple of months at one of our committee meetings about this idea that I think Councilmember Schlossmacher is the one who said, you know, we've pretty much tried everything. The last thing in our bag of tricks is probably this reconfiguration. And I think there is some education that will go along with that. If there's any carryover from kind of what we heard in the past, there were concerns, particularly about reductions in traffic volumes. And so we've got a lot of educational pieces, I think, that we can share as we move this conversation forward. I think we're trying to just get that little bit of a quick sort of gut check about, do the perceptions in the community align with, you all have been pretty consistent in sharing, the concerns that you have that align with some of the things that you see here.
And then, Laura, I think Hillary was hoping you could scroll to the top of the question list. You probably can't see the chat since you're presenting, but.
Okay.
Or the first few questions was her request.
Is there a specific number?
Hillary, do you have a question or one you want to see?
We were just on page 2 for a while, and I went to look.
Oh,
okay.
Sorry.
Page 1 again.
No, it's okay. It's okay. Thank you.
All right. Anything else for Laura on this one before we switch to the business survey? All right.
Okay. All right. So very similar. What we've done here, though, is start off by sort of asking, and some of these notes on here, please know that these are my notes about when we put it into SurveyMonkey, it asks you what the question type is. So it won't say all of this craziness on there. But asking for the address and block range on Johnson Drive, again, because there are a variety of different parking configurations and situations through that section. And so we're hopeful that people will identify themselves when they get to the end of the survey. If they aren't willing to identify themselves specifically, our hope would be that we would at least be able to capture and frame those comments within a particular block so that we have a better sense of, is it a block where there's a pedestrian flashing beacon that already exists, or the traffic signal, or do we have, parking in front of the Mission Theater looks dramatically different than parking in other sections along that corridor. And again, then asking number of years in business along this corridor, either in a current or previous location, because we've had some businesses that have changed spots on Johnson Drive, and we want to be able to capture that. And again, trying to get at that sense of, what is your experience? Are you only post 2014 or, and then very similar questions to what was in the user survey. What is your perception as a business owner, again, of traffic volumes through downtown? And we can add certainly the since 2014 there. We ask questions then about what parking, and I guess we didn't ask we did ask the concern. We did ask pedestrian concerns and driver concerns. What parking improvements would benefit your business? So most of them are the same or similar to what we saw in the user survey. So we can kind of tweak the alternative transportation or look at a walkability question. But then here we also put, an openness or a desire to explore shared parking agreements. I mean, one of the things that, with the addition of the locale and some of the other businesses thinking about peak times for, a brewery versus peak times for the veterinary clinic or some of the other businesses may be different. So how open are people to exploring those shared parking agreements? And then anecdotally, again, what do you hear from your customers regarding traffic and parking? So we want to give the business owners the chance to not only share with us their perspective, but those things that they hear from their customers. And then would you be interested in participating in a focus group? Do you want status updates and the like? So it's kind of very similar. We can certainly make the same, add the same, modifications that we talked about on the user survey, but was there anything else you would like to see added for the business owners?
Laura, for marketability or walkability, from the business owner perspective, I wonder if we should frame it more as, measures that could increase foot traffic to your business or something like that, that ties it to the business angle, but.
Okay.
Any other questions, anyone? I can't see everyone, so feel free
Just
to chime in.
I have a comment.
Yep, Ken.
What you might want to do, Laura, if you don't get the person sharing where their business is or name, perhaps what you should do is in the end of the survey, ask which block are they, is their business located? I mean, maybe an address range so that they can at least tell you where they're located.
Yep.
That's what's
our,
at the start,
it's
right?
our so this very first question, address or block range, is going to be a drop. So it'll have options.
Okay.
So it's a little tricky because I want them to answer that question before they get to the end and see that we want their name too. But I didn't take the time to build out those block ranges for this draft survey, but that will certainly be a part of that.
I'm sorry, I missed.
Oh, you're fine. It wasn't very clear because you don't see the mental trigger for the address ranges wasn't there.
Sollie, I have a question.
Yeah, Hillary.
Laura, I was just wondering how many surveys you hope to get back from each group.
I don't know. I think we'll have. I think the business owners, our plan is, let me touch on that just a little bit. I mean, we certainly have a list of email contacts for businesses that we can go through and be very specific in making sure we, our plan is for those businesses in that stretch that we have specific contact information for to email a link directly. So I don't want to rely necessarily on them knowing that it's out there, or hearing that it's out there. Our plan has also been, we've got a variety of other email contact lists developed, whether that's through the market, whether that's through our constant contact list. And so we would promote it in that fashion, as well as just making the survey available, promoting it through social media, making it available on the website. So, I don't know, it's certainly not a scientific, statistically valid survey necessarily, but again, when we think about where we've been in this process and this transition, we're at that point with the CARS project coming in 2022 that, now is the time if there are any changes that we think we want to try through this section, the time is now. So I don't know. I think we'll get good feedback. I think we had feedback in 2014. I wouldn't say it was it was very strong opinions, as Debbie can probably recall, from that time, and a lot of back and forth on the council, but we certainly, I don't think, packed the council chambers either, from that perspective. So we'll have to see what we get and then decide if we need to do another push, or we feel like we have enough either, direction from the public and the business community about what they're considering, what they would like to see.
Laura, are you planning to send this to only the businesses in that stretch between Lamar and Null, or are you going to expand it beyond that?
No, I want to specifically make sure that for anybody that we have that contact information, they get that link, but then we would we're going to target whatever lists we have and contacts we have to get it out, because certainly other business owners are impacted by that stretch of roadway as well, and probably frequent it,
Mm-hmm. All right. Any last questions for Laura on this?
I just want to add that I'm really looking forward as we get to spring for an enhanced and increased presence of the police. I have a lot of people, I live like 4 houses off of Johnson Drive, and we've got a lot of people speeding through there, especially from the east to the west, not only defying speed limit, but the noise ordinance, especially late at night. They're starting to rev up their engines and stuff. And I can tell you, they're probably not stopping here for anything. They're probably on their way through. I just think from time to time, we need to get some assessment of the police presence and ensure that we get more presence down on Johnson Drive. That would be my preference.
Yeah, Debbie, I think I had an experience where I heard it late at night, somebody on a motorcycle just like running up and down Johnson Drive several times.
Yeah, sorry about that. I'll keep it in check next time.
And Debbie, I just want you to know, I have instructed to hire the more enforcement and presence on Johnson Drive. Hopefully, you know, we've been down a few of late, but hopefully they are still doing so. And if not, they're supposed to track that for me and let me know how much time they're spending. So I'll make sure we let you know what we're seeing.
Thanks, Dan.
Great. All right, thank you, Laura. And I think you're up next too, which is, are there any department updates for the Community Development Committee?
I don't have any. We've got plenty to cover on finance and admin with our comprehensive status update. So I don't
All
have
right.
any.
Well, it is now 7:46 p.m. and with no further discussion, that concludes the meeting of the Community Development Committee. Again, this video will be made public on our website, missionks.org.
Okay, does anybody need a break? Do you need a 2-minute break or are you ready to go forward with finance? Can I see you want to go forward or break? Laura, poor Laura, she's probably been there since 4 this morning.
Nah.
Okay, let's move forward. This is Councilmember Kring. It is now 7:47 p.m. and I'd like to call this meeting of the Finance and Administration Committee to order. Again, in consideration of the COVID-19 social distancing recommendations, this meeting will be held virtually via Zoom. The public is invited to participate and will be allowed to make comments through the online chat feature. Please note that the comments are visible to the entire group. If you wish to make a public comment, please state your name and the city of residence for the record and be conscientious of others trying to speak. This meeting will be recorded and posted on the city's website at www.missionks.org. Please contact the administration offices at 913-676-8350 with any questions or concerns. The first topic we have is public hearings and public comments, and we don't have any this evening, so we'll move on to our action items. The first action item tonight is the acceptance of the Finance and Administration Committee minutes from Audrey McClanahan.
Thank you. Yes, these are the Finance and Administration Committee minutes from January 6th of 2021 for your consideration, please. Thank you.
Does anybody have comments or questions? I'm sorry, Ken.
Recommend acceptance.
Great.
Thank you.
Okay, let's move on to action item number 2, and that's the declaration of surplus equipment from Brian Scott.
Thank you. Last month, I brought to you a declaration of surplus equipment, police cars and computers and furniture and whatnot. Unfortunately, we forgot to add public works equipment. So that's what's before you tonight. They have two big items, a dump truck and a pickup truck that they like to sell at auction, and a skid steer as well. And then some snowplow equipment. So if acceptable to the city council, these items will be sold at auction through Purple Wave.
Any comments or questions on this?
Recommend that we take it through council consent agenda.
Great. Let's move forward to our next action item. The third action item is a new CMB license application. Audrey McClanahan.
Thank you. Yes, state statute and missions code requires that any business that is wanting to sell cereal malt beverages in their shop needs to have an application, have that approved by council, as well as a background check, and pay the fee accordingly. The corner Lalo's Kitchen at 5038 Lamar Avenue has applied for their CMB. They have completed their background check and there is no issue there, as well as paid their fee. And their application looks good to go. And this is, their license will be good through December 31st of 2021, and then renewed annually along with the other CMBs as well. But that is all I have for the item, unless there are any questions on it.
Wishing them lots of luck and hope they are successful.
Yes, definitely.
Any comments?
Recommend consent.
Consent?
Yes.
Thank you. Okay, let's move. We're going quickly.
Thank you.
Thanks, Audrey. The last action item is the appointment of a city historian, Frank Bruce, who's been our historian in the past, and Laura Smith will give us an update on his position.
Thank you. Back in 2017, then Mayor Schongert approached the council with the idea of creating a city historian's position, and recommended that Frank Bruce, who is a longtime Mission resident and in my experience, it can tell you just about anything you want to know about anything that was anywhere, was appointed to that position. We drafted a resolution that sort of outlined the duties and responsibilities as anticipated at that time. And we included that the appointment was to be done on a biannual basis. Quite honestly, with transition in council and a variety of other things, I think we all forgot that there was actually this expiration of that appointment term. And I know that Mr. Bruce has been working with Kate Deacon, our market coordinator, who's been working on the AutoCast application and just been very gracious in sort of sharing and transferring a lot of information and historical knowledge there. But it was brought to our attention after a Ward 3 meeting recently that expiration of the term had expired, and Councilmember Kring had asked for reconsideration of Mr. Bruce's appointment as a city historian. So we've made some revisions to the resolution to more accurately sort of reflect that role and responsibilities, and would look at continuing it as a biannual.
Great. Does anyone have comments or questions?
I have a comment.
Yeah, sure.
Do you know whether he works at all with the Johnson County Museum in trying to maybe establish some historical information at the museum for our city?
I don't know. Laura, do you
I
know?
think
if you-
Emily's got her hand raised. I think
Okay.
I don't get that impression, but I do know we've been building really nice relationships through the AutoCast app development, especially in seeking their the museum's assistance with photographs. So I think there's a nice, I guess you as well with Countryside Records, but I think the foundation is there potentially, but I don't get the sense that he has any kind of formal relationship with them.
No, I think he's gone. I know he's gone to the museum in the past to sort of research and help, find some documents that support that history or outline that. But I don't know that he has specific things that are appropriate for us to provide back to the museum.
Yeah, I'm just thinking that relying on an individual is somewhat tenuous over time, and it might be good to establish some sort of collection at the museum. And it may be something that the Northeast mayors might want to discuss in a collective to possibly have some of the history of Northeast Johnson County represented at the museum.
Debbie, I had a comment too.
Okay, so go ahead.
And not necessarily as part of this position, but could be at some point in the future. But as we're talking about history, and then our next item up is racial equity. I just hope, as we move forward in those conversations, either as part of a UCS facilitated piece or otherwise, that the city is engaging in an examination of our history with that same proposed racial equity lens as we are our actions going forward. So just kind of, putting that on our list for part of those conversations.
Sure. Good comment.
I'm sorry, Debbie, I had a question for
Sure,
Laura.
go ahead.
Laura, could you explain a little bit about the promotion of the history of Mission at community events and at local schools that that has been done through this position over the past couple of years?
I don't really believe that it has been done. That was something that was included as we researched resolutions. So I don't think that, to my knowledge, that's not something that Mr. Bruce has done in his role as the city historian.
To me, that seems somewhat outside of the scope of what, we have seen this position do and what I would imagine it does. I don't know if everyone agrees, but I'd maybe like to see that part removed. I think the historian role is really of service to city staff and council to help with record keeping and providing information as it goes, in addition to the programs that he does. But in terms of, public facing at schools and whatnot, I'm not crazy about that section B.
Yeah, that might make sense to make it consistent with practice too. If we want the city, public information officer or city admin to be the one speaking on behalf of the city, that might make sense.
I agree.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea too.
Yeah, we can remove section B from the resolution.
Thank you.
Thanks, Laura.
Mhm.
Any other comments or questions on this particular action item? Okay, do you have a recommendation to take it to council? Ken?
Sure, take it to council. I'd say consent.
Okay. Okay, now we're leaving the action item agenda and going to discussion items. And the first discussion item we have is the UCS racial equity theory of action and cohort. And that would be Laura Smith.
Yes, thank you. And I know we have with us this evening Catherine Evans, who's just joined us, and I think Julie Brewer with UCS may be on as well, listening in. So I've called her out, so we know she's there. Anyway, as you all know, following the George Floyd incident in Minneapolis back in May of 2020, our city, along with many others across the nation, really began focusing some discussions around issues of racial justice, equity, and inclusion. We issued formal statements by the mayor and the police chief. The council ultimately issued a joint statement acknowledging for our residents and our employees that we have an obligation to sort of engage in these conversations, and that we were really ready to demonstrate our commitment to do so. Through the work that we did last summer, it became clear that both council and the staff really wanted to see Mission address the substance of these issues and to make a commitment to take action. And so we developed an action plan that we put into place starting back in August. The first two steps of that were opportunities to take a deeper dive or a look at police policies and practices, as well as training, discipline, complaints, and racial statistics, bias-based statistics. Our hope had been, step 3 in the plan was to create a community forum where we could start to engage and dialogue around these issues. And again, thanks to COVID, we didn't have that opportunity. So we pulled together and requested information from council and staff and others for individuals who might be interested or willing to engage with us around this topic. And we have compiled, I think, a great start in that list. We actually convened a focus group right before Christmas. And it was a small, I would say small but mighty focus group. And really the purpose of that was to have an opportunity for us to just generally introduce and talk about diversity and inclusion in our community, but then also to specifically get some feedback about characteristics and qualities that might be desirable in a new chief of police. So while I would have liked to include Chief Madden in that focus group, we excluded him at that time because we were still in the recruitment and selection process. But got some, I think, really great feedback. Our hope is to continue. I shared with the council recently, I think we're looking at and working with one of our local business owners to convene a more business oriented focus group, and then also another just general group. So we don't have the dates for those scheduled yet, but continue to work on that. And then really the final step in our action plan was to look at how do we, implement opportunities for ongoing training and education for elected officials, for our staff, and for really the community at large, potentially around implicit bias, race, and inequity. And we committed to doing that kind of as soon as possible, but no later than the first quarter of this year. Probably early last summer, I had reached out to UCS to kind of engage in some conversations around where do we go, and had the pleasure of sort of meeting Catherine for the first time and being able to engage in some conversations with she and Julie around the work that UCS was doing with their Racial Equity and Inclusion Committee. And those conversations have continued. And I'll let Catherine elaborate on kind of the journey that they've been on. But we're really at a point where they have a proposed program that, as we've looked at and investigated and continued to speak with them, thinks aligns with some of our needs and our objectives pretty nicely. And so we've invited them to give us a brief presentation on that this evening, and then look for council discussion about how or if we want to advance that forward as an action item next month. So with that, Catherine Evans with Rooted Strategy, served as a staff to the Racial Equity and Inclusion Committee for UCS. And welcome, Catherine, and we'll let you, I know you have a presentation, and let you take it from there.
Okay, thank you, Laura. Thank you to the council for inviting me to the meeting and letting me present on the work that we are doing that I believe is very much aligned with some of your goals around racial equity. I am going to attempt to share my screen so that you can see the presentation that I'm looking at. And if someone could just give me a thumbs up that you see what I see. All right, awesome. I'm going to move it into slideshow mode, and then we'll get the show started. So again, I'm Catherine Evans. I am on staff at UCS, manager of special projects. And I also have a consulting practice called Rooted Strategy. I've been fortunate enough to work with UCS over the years as a full-time staff from 2015 to 2018, and now as a part-time staff member. And what is most exciting to me about that is that there always seem to be new opportunities to explore and innovate as we try to, find solutions to some of our most complex challenges as a community. And I think that this issue of racial equity is no exception. I think that, as Laura sort of gave the summary of the events last summer and how that has shifted the City of Mission's priorities around racial equity, that's happening all across our county. It's happening in many other jurisdictions, and I think it's requiring us to think outside the box a little bit about how we address some of these challenges. And so I'm excited to present to you tonight the Racial Equity in Cities pilot program, which is the sort of one way that UCS hopes to come alongside jurisdictions, including the City of Mission, to help you make progress on your racial equity goals. Like many in our community and across the country, UCS has really begun to prioritize a greater awareness, analysis, and action with regards to racial equity. If you know about us, you know that we've always worked to bring diverse partners to the table to work towards common goals. And we really strive to be an institutional ally and partner to diverse communities, and making sure that we're engaging and working alongside those who are disproportionately impacted by social and economic barriers to health and well-being. Our mission is to enhance the availability and delivery of health and human services, and we do that because we have a vision that all people in our community will have the opportunity to fulfill their potential and contribute to the community as well. And yet, what we know from a vast and growing body of research is that racism can create negative health outcomes for people in our community. This is something that has been acknowledged in the public health literature for a while, and recently many local governments have also come to acknowledge racism as a public health threat. The American Medical Association recently named racism as a premier public health threat as well. And so we are coming alongside some of those institutions, and we see it. We see it in the research that we do. We see it in outcomes for people, especially people of color in our communities. We know that things like quality education and employment and wages and food and housing, we know that these things are critical to shaping health. And we also know that when those factors are distributed in unfair or unjust ways, often due to systemic racism, they can contribute to systemic racial and ethnic disparities in health. And we've seen that time and time again. Unfortunately, one of the more tragic outcomes of the COVID-19 pandemic is the sharp disparity between in infection and death rates for people of color. And so it's really been brought to the surface over this last year, but we've known this for a long time. And so, you know, we're acknowledging it as an institutional partner. And it's really important that we acknowledge this because we know that our community is only going to become more racially diverse over time. This chart that you're seeing on your screen is representative of the you know, sort of demographics of our community by age group. And we're seeing that younger generations are just more diverse. There's more diversity in those age groups. And so we have to be thoughtful about planning now to ensure that current, you know, both current and future residents of our community can have access to the opportunities to, you know, that keep them healthy, but also that they feel that they belong and are included, which is a very important part of well-being as well. And so that has really encouraged all this data and information has really encouraged UCS to form a sort of clear purpose around racial equity and to think about how we're going to translate that purpose into practices, strategic actions that we can take that are within our scope, that are within our core work areas, and that really bring in the stakeholders and partners that we are accustomed to working with so that we can make change in this arena. So I'm going to give you a little warning. The next slide is going to have a lot of information on it, and I'm happy to share this with the council after this meeting. I want you to primarily focus on what is circled in red. So this is the theory of action for the Racial Equity and Inclusion Initiative at UCS. This is kind of taking all of those components that were on the last slide, our purpose, our principles, participants, structure, and practices, and laying out what is our plan, what are we going to do, how are we going to move from this awareness into action. And so we've identified all of these components. I think it's important that I note our core purpose is to support the integration of diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging into the core work of UCS so that it becomes not only just an initiative that we have going, but really becomes a primary lens through which we view our work as an organization. And then what you see circled there in red is what I'm excited to share with you tonight. The Racial Equity in Cities program is was sort of born out of this idea that our Racial Equity and Inclusion Committee had, that some of our closest and most longstanding partners in this work have been local jurisdictions. As you know, we work with the City of Mission and other jurisdictions on the Alcohol Tax Fund, the Human Services Fund, and recently the Johnson County Housing Study. And so we have a history of working closely with jurisdictions. And we also know that in the wake of the murder of George Floyd last summer, many jurisdictions are searching for an answer to how do we respond, what do we do, what kinds of goals are realistic for us, and how should we be pursuing them. And so we thought that this was a perfect opportunity for us to form a strategy around helping cities, providing support to local jurisdictions and technical assistance to them as they pursue their own initiatives. So I'm going to just give you a little bit more information about the Racial Equity in Cities program and how we've envisioned it. And I hope that you're writing down questions or comments, because I look forward to hearing those from you at the end of this presentation. So the way that we imagine the Racial Equity in Cities program is that we want to recruit 5 to 6 local jurisdictions into a community of practice, which is a structure that will enable you to not only learn with one another, but learn from one another as you implement different strategies and ideas in your own organizations. We are very intentional about understanding that this work requires more than just, your basic diversity training or your racial equity training. Those are important components for sure, that education and training and really understanding the history and the current state and, levels of oppression and all of those dynamics that we come to think about when we think about training. But we also want to make sure that you have tools to really assess what is the state of our organization, where are we at right now, and are we truly as ready as we think we are to take on this bold racial equity work, or do we still have work that we need to do? So we want to walk alongside with you in making that assessment and in planning some really strategic goals. We also feel that it's important that we give you tools to apply what you learn and sustain it, because we know that what we're really talking about here is kind of a shift in culture, in organizational culture, and that needs to be really thoughtful and intentional, and we want to make sure that we're providing you with the leadership capacity and with the tools that you need to sustain what you learn and gain in the community of practice. And then because this is a pilot, we also want to make sure that we're learning as we go. We want to know what impact is this having at all levels of your organization, with your staff, with your elected officials, with your residents. How is it changing people's perspectives about what's important when it comes to policy making or public administration? We really want to understand what impact this program has. And so that'll be another great opportunity for the community of practice to contribute to this sort of body of knowledge about how do jurisdictions do racial equity work, and what can we learn from that, and how can we share that with our colleagues in other jurisdictions as well. So in terms of the timeline, just to give you a sense of how we're moving through this, we are really at this point just trying to figure out who's going to be in that core group, in that cohort. And we're also confirming the group of thought partners that is going to be your technical assistants and strategic planning advisors as the community of practice. So far, we have commitments from several really incredible institutions who want to come alongside us and serve in a sort of roundtable with us to provide these services and supports to jurisdictions. And they include the Public Management Center at the University of Kansas and the Kansas Leadership Center. We've also are in the process of confirming who will be our content expert around diversity, equity, and inclusion. And that individual will come alongside UCS, Public Management Center, Kansas Leadership Center, and form this Thought Partners Roundtable. And we'll come together in February and March. This is, again, a tentative timeline, come together to sort of design the program, kind of make sure that it's got all the components that the jurisdictions in the community of practice need. And then we will begin that implementation through the rest of this year, where we're actually providing you with the workshops and the educational seminars and the trainings and the assessments and all the things that you need in order to really step confidently into this work. So that is, that's kind of an overview of the timeline. And then I wanted to share with you how we're thinking about funding this project, which we have to be really sort of innovative here, because on one hand, we want to make sure that jurisdictions are able to participate and that there's an entry point for jurisdictions of different sizes. But on the other hand, we also know that this is an investment. Like, this is something that we believe, and I'm sure you would agree, that if jurisdictions are interested in learning how to do this or do it better, that represents an investment on the part of jurisdictions. And so when we say contributions from jurisdictions, we're really thinking about what is the investment that jurisdictions can make. And that will be pulled with resources from UCS and from our consultants and facilitators, and then some private foundation grants as well. And that is all I have for now. And I would be happy to take questions. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen so that we can see each other.
I'd like to ask you a question. I went through the multicultural leadership program at the Urban League. Just wondered if we ever crossed boundaries and you moved into Kansas City. Do we have any relationship with Urban League from UCS?
Not that I'm aware of. Julie, if Julie is able to come off mute, which I'm not sure she is, she might be able to answer that better.
I am able to come off mute. Hi, good evening. I'm Julie Brewer. I'm the Executive Director of United Community Services of Johnson County. So council member, we, not in recent years with the Urban League in particular, we are currently with our housing work and our health equity network, we're working with a number of groups that represent our communities of color. We're working with the NAACP, we're working with the Latino Leadership Coalition, and organizations such as that. But currently, we have been focusing in this particular pilot initiative on a little bit on that history of Johnson County, when we think about the housing history and kind of how we became the community that we did and the demographics that we have, and coming alongside those communities that are being thoughtful of what's that future going to look like for my jurisdiction or for greater county community.
Okay, thank you.
I will note too, we've been on about a 2-year path with this. And so for us, in addition to our own research and education, we've also participated in the Kauffman Foundation has been funding the REI Institute training sessions. So we've been participating in that, and also providing other educational outlets for our board and council of advisors as we are all on this journey of integrating this work more into all our work areas of our organization.
Excellent, thank you.
I had one question. Yeah, could you share some of the cities that are also considering joining the cohort?
Sure, yeah, absolutely. So the cities that we've had conversations with beyond the city of Mission include Prairie Village, Roland Park, Lenexa, Westwood, and Johnson County government. We've had some initial conversations with them as well. Great question.
Great, thank you.
Welcome.
Anybody else have comments or questions for Catherine? Great overview. Great overview. Go ahead, Trent.
Hi, Catherine and Julie. Great presentation. Hi. I did just have one question. Could you go into a specific example of like what a particular exercise might look like in some of these discussions, or like what kinds of like what a specific activity would be that we would be participating in, just to kind of give an idea more on some of the practices involved?
Sure, that's a really good question. So I will give you an example, and I'll first put out a disclaimer that we don't have a curriculum at this point, because our goal is to enable the participants in the community or practice to sort of inform what the curriculum will look like. But having said that, I'm almost certain that there will be some element of an assessment that will, of an internal assessment that will be requested by the jurisdictions in the community of practice. And there's some really great tools out there that already exist that we don't have to reinvent the wheel, but it's helpful to have a facilitator to talk you through sort of interpreting the results of those assessments and how to apply what you learned from those assessments in your organization. One of my favorites that I'm a big advocate for and I've used in my consulting practice is a tool from Equity in the Center. It's called the Race Equity Cycle, and it's all about building a culture of racial equity within your organization. And so there's some key characteristics of a strong racial equity culture that you can sort of assess where your organization is at various sort of levers, like in your senior leadership, in your governing body, in your organizational learning environment, in your organizational culture, in the way that you look at data. So it's pretty comprehensive and very well regarded. That's one that I like to use. And I'm not saying that that's the one that we will use, but that's an example of the types of assessments that are available that our thought partners, our consultants and facilitators are really skilled and experienced at facilitating and helping you interpret the results of those assessments. So that's just one example. I hope that's helpful, Trent.
Yeah, that was great. Thanks.
Any other comments or questions?
A couple of things I might just highlight as we wrap this up is, some of the things that as we've been in conversation with Catherine and Julie over the last several months, looking at creating, and I think Catherine mentioned it, this lens through which to evaluate your policy, and whether that is construction of infrastructure, maintenance of infrastructure, snow plowing, police policies. It crosses all boundaries and gives us that tool to really think about the impacts of all the policies that we make. And interestingly enough, in the focus group that we had before Christmas, there was an issue about very specifically talking about the perception of neighborhoods north of Johnson Drive compared to neighborhoods south of Johnson Drive, and the quality of streets and street maintenance. So it was very kind of just striking to be coming off of hearing that so recently, because I don't think we've ever heard, or we don't always hear all of that. I think the other thing that has been really appealing from at least my perspective in thinking about building out the infrastructure internally and the skills and abilities internally for us to continue this work, not entirely on our own, but on our own going forward, so that that we have that knowledge and those skill sets more in-house, which I know is something that, as we've looked at trying to put together training plans or trying to promote this work, being able to rely on the resources of UCS and that I think will be very helpful as we move through that process.
Yeah, I think that model makes a lot of sense, Laura. I know that Chief Madden has talked about train the trainer in the context of the police department. And I think if we can, consult with experts who know what they're doing on these things and then bring that knowledge and skills, in-house going forward. Not to say that we're clueless, but always, can use more help.
I agree. I think this is a really great jumping off point for us. I'm excited about this opportunity.
That's great to hear. Yeah, we're hopeful that this really increases capacity for you to do the things that you want to do in this space of racial equity. So I'm also very excited, and I'm happy to answer any follow-up questions as they come up.
Could I just ask you one quick question, Catherine? What's your background?
My background, let's see. I have a background as a community organizer. That's how I started my career on the Missouri side. And then I moved into working with UCS and doing sort of large scale initiatives and, you know, helping sort of bring shape to complex issues. It's something that I really enjoy doing. And then I moved into fund development for a little while, and then I started my own business. So it's been a rapid decade, lots of change. Yeah. So it's, but I really, I have a master's in public administration. So I'm of the same mind as many of you in terms of how I, think about governance and community and things like that. And I think that the processes that exist within local government are extremely relevant and important to the everyday experiences of residents. And so I have to commend you for being so attentive and intentional around this issue, because it is extremely important to people's everyday lives.
It is. Thank you so much for sharing your information with us, and we look forward to working through Laura to meet with you again.
You're very welcome. Have a good rest of your meeting. I'm going to sign off.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Julie, too.
Bye.
Bye. Okay, let's go to our last discussion item, and it is the 2020 project status update and budget review from Laura Smith.
Okay, let me get myself unmuted here again. Okay, well, it's hard to believe that we're in February already, and it was time to take a minute to take a deep breath and think about all of the things that we accomplished and have been working on in 2020 and provide you with the status update. So what we sent out to you was kind of a compilation that all of the leadership team contributed to in recounting and recapping, really in two categories: those projects and programs that we anticipated because they either came out of council goals and objectives or were included in our budget process, and then sharing about an equal number of pages, not surprisingly, were those projects and things that impacted us that we hadn't necessarily anticipated, planned, or budgeted for. So I don't know whether I'll hit a few highlights. I'm not going to certainly go through everything in all of these pages, but I'm certainly happy to hit a few highlights. I know others on the leadership team can answer questions or provide some additional feedback and commentary if you would like. And then we will, like I mentioned in the discussion item summary, we'll just plan to incorporate this 4 times a year, so you have a very similar status update. We had talked about that last year, and then we got sidetracked by COVID and a variety of other things. So we're getting this back on track, have created this shared document. And then I will come back. I sent out very late this afternoon kind of the 2020 year-end budget review and some preliminary thoughts on 2021 revisions. And I know you've not had an opportunity to review that. So I want to hit a couple of high points for that, and then we'll plan to just make that the focus of our work session later this month, where we can really start to delve into that. But I think there's some good information. And quite frankly, I'm still sorting through all the bits and pieces of where we ended last year. And we haven't really seen, we've just kind of seen late last week our first property tax and sales tax distributions going into this year. So be able to continue that. But I think some of the major projects that continue to move forward, comprehensive plan update. Brian and Caitlin provided a really good summary of that. And then I know I saw today an invitation for a steering committee meeting. So the steering committee is gearing back up. We've been through the process of collecting data via the website. And Confluence will be coming back to kind of share that summarized data, their reactions and responses to that, and then as well as moving forward with some of the other components and parts and pieces of the comp plan update. We've got a variety of different software projects in progress or in various stages of requests for proposals, including building permitting and code enforcement software, municipal court software, and hopefully, Brian's finance software gets sidetracked, it seems like every year, by a big development project, whether it's the locale or Sunflower Developments Group's project. And you don't wish for that development to slow down, but maybe it'll slow down long enough to get that one moving forward in 2021. The Facility Conservation Improvement Program, we had a meeting last week that is in full swing, looking at some of the initial information that was provided back from the consultants, and we expect to bring that forward to you here. I think we're targeting March committee. And then we'll have a chance to evaluate the projects that they've identified as potentially will result in some energy savings, and then we'll prioritize and keep that moving forward. The COVID Housing Relief Fund, I actually had a conversation, I should have mentioned it before Julie dropped off the phone, but Julie and I had a call this morning, and she has connected me with a couple of different agencies. So I think we'll be able to get that program up and running. Some interesting nuances, which once we make those connections with some of the additional CARES funding and some funding available through the county. Branding and communications, I think we all know where we are. As Emily mentioned earlier this evening, we'll be excited at our February council meeting to share the launch date for the new website, and then continuing our work with Crux. The paid parental and caregiver leave, which was implemented the end of last year, and we have had our first employee who has been able to take advantage of that following the birth of a child. And so I know was very grateful to have that opportunity and that benefit available. So didn't take us long to put that one into use. A lot of work around the park conceptual master planning that Penn has done with Mohawk Park and the steering committee there, and now Broadmoor Park and their steering committee. That work is in progress. I think most of you are aware that we had applied for a Land and Water Conservation Fund grant for the improvements at Mohawk Park, and we've been notified that our grant has been recommended and is kind of hopefully in its final stages of approval. And I know that Councilmember Flora has assisted us in getting some letters of support from some of our representatives. So we hope to be able to get a grant award. Wouldn't that be a great feeling? But really moving forward in that conceptual redesign process, so that we can position ourselves to think about appropriate renewal for a Parks and Recreation sales tax, and our approach to getting updated amenities in our parks. The Rock Creek Channel project, if you haven't been over and looked at the wall behind the former Mission Bowl property, you should go take a look because it's pretty impressive. Celia and I were out walking that a couple of weeks ago. That $5.4 million project is about 90% complete. They'll have to come back in the spring to do some paving and site restoration. But we were pleased to be able to get the Rolling Court Homes Association paving done and all of those improvements made prior to the onset of any bad winter weather, so they had access to their garages and their residences. Once we do have the project finalized this spring, we'll certify those costs, and their contribution in the form of their special assessments will start. I think most of you know, we were not able to reach a resolution with Wendy's. So we eliminated that portion of the project adjacent to their property, which was unfortunate. That did result in some savings in the project. And I think Celia will be able to report out probably next month what those, we've had some significant savings on that project, which is always a good thing. Would have liked to put the wall in, but being able to have a little extra money back is also a great thing. Work continues on our street asset and inventory and street maintenance program. Next week, we'll have the work session really focused on timing potentially of the sales, the renewal of the street sales tax in 2021, and some of the other financing considerations for that. Stormwater asset and inventory. So I think we've made some really great progress this last year on asset management and asset inventories. And we'll just continue to build those out and maintain those. The Lamar resurfacing project was our big, highly visible street reconstruction project, and the addition of the bike lanes and the opportunity to celebrate that was a great, I think, PR and just a great accomplishment overall. We were able to successfully transition the family adoption program in-house this year. And I'm still working on that. I'd hope to have the final budget numbers for you. And then Penn dropped a couple of checks off on my desk this morning. And so we'll talk about that when we look at those final budget numbers. But I can tell you that in this year, we have raised more than we have in any other year of the history of the program. So I think we're bumping up against about $25,000 in contributions that were received. So we were able to serve 84 families. Penn and the Family Adoption Committee made some really important changes as a result of COVID to how the program is sort of staged and a lot of the logistics. And I think many of those things will carry over and serve us well, even in a post-COVID world. So great success there. We've also transitioned the magazine in-house and are continuing, I think, to produce a really popular magazine. We're looking forward to 5 issues in 2021. We've been working as the editorial board to really build out the stories and the content, almost in some hopes about a year in advance, so that we aren't scrambling at the last minute to try to come up with stories and ideas for that. Then we really included in the report just a few more of our basic service delivery successes in building, permitting, and inspection. As you can see, even in a COVID world, we really didn't see a slowdown in our permitting, our plan review, our inspection processes. And great statistics, I think, in code enforcement activity. Continue to have residents who take advantage of our assistance programs. I think we've done a variety of upgrades in the technology area. One that we'll be rolling out at the end of February will be our transition from Google Docs and the kind of the Google platform to Microsoft 365. Included information on just other miscellaneous CIP projects in Parks and Recreation, construction projects in Public Works, Hodges planters, and just kind of some other miscellaneous highlights and things that we were able to accomplish in 2020. And so then on the list of things that we hadn't anticipated, COVID, and more COVID. And certainly I think you all are very familiar with, where we are and the decisions that we've made and the processes that we've used to sort of look at modifications to our operations, our protocols, our policies, to be able to align at least with state and county goals. And in some instances, we've taken a much more conservative approach. And I think that's been a real benefit for our residents. We were able to take advantage of a little over $300,000 of CARES funding to be able to purchase equipment and make some modifications that I think will protect both the public in our buildings and the employees in our buildings going forward. It does continue to have a fairly significant impact on our city's budget, especially in the area of parks and recreation revenues, which I'll touch on in just a moment. And we're going to need to really continually monitor and review that as we continue to move forward. I think one of the biggest successes of this past year has been the approval of the Mission Bowl redevelopment project with the Sunflower Group. I know that being able to incorporate the affordable housing requirement and the LEED Silver certification has really elevated this project as one that I think we can all be proud of and point to in the future. We've included and just kind of wrapped up with some of our racial equity conversations, review of police department policies and procedures. I know that Dan has referenced on several occasions his work and with the getting the Lefta software implemented and being able to come back here in the near term with some of those data points that we've been looking for. Brian and others accomplished a bond refinancing. Sometimes we forget about some of those as the year goes on. And when you go back and recapture that and you realize we saved our community over $800,000 in interest payments. It's a good reminder to have when you have that recap at the end of the year, and it takes a tremendous amount of time and energy to accomplish that. We have a new, City Hall remodel. We passed the snow shoveling ordinance. We've kind of had a reboot and a reset for the safety committee, reemphasizing a focus on safety for our employees. And tonight we just had the opportunity to swear in a new police chief after a several month recruitment process. There are a couple of big projects that aren't on this list. You realize when you get to the end that there's no gateway update. And so there is no gateway update other than we need to come back to you and really start to look at what the next steps are in terms of a timeline. So we are currently working to schedule the developer to get him in front of the council to share that information. And then I realized that we need to provide an update on kind of the building codes that we had originally started discussing last fall, and we're kind of put on hold. So we'll come back and do that. So I'll pause for just a minute, any of us on the leadership team can take comments, questions. And then if there are other things that you would like some additional updates on that we didn't get included in this memo, please let us know. We'll do that and then kind of recap some of the financial highlights. So I think Sollie has a question.
Yeah, I just had a quick question about the greenhouse gas inventory and the timing. I know that the Climate Action KC/Mark Climate Action Plan is in its final stages, and I think the Mark board's voting on it later this month. And so, I would just say if there's any room to push that up from summer and get those RFPs going, or, maybe look at the company that Roland Park used for that. It seemed like they moved pretty efficiently in getting theirs done, that I would just encourage movement on that, because I know it's been an ongoing priority of the Sustainability Commission, and it seems like getting it done sooner rather than later would allow us to take action in connection with the regional climate action plan.
I had just a comment, if I may, Laura. So Laura, thank you so much for this. I see this really as a nice reflection of the year and good opportunity to think about all that's been done. And I know that we're virtual and probably will continue to be so, at least I imagine through the summer. Hopefully, maybe by the end of the year, we'll all be together in person. And I know that a virtual format may not be right for, say, a retreat. And I know that's probably something that you and the mayor have discussed, but perhaps we could have some sort of electronic survey, you know, that shares council's interests and priorities for, you know, 2021, just a way for all of us to kind of share where our heads are at in an informal way that wouldn't, you know, require some sort of scheduled meeting. Just a thought, if there's something we could do along those lines.
Yeah, absolutely. We can start to look at that and think about that.
Sollie commented outside summer council meetings. That sounds really nice.
It does, until it gets to be 120 degrees. And then count me out of those.
It would be cool enough by 7.
Lake house.
Okay, anybody else have any? Yes.
Laura, any thoughts again on the aquatic center this coming summer? Is there any thinking about that at this point in time with regards to whether we're going to be able to open the pool or not?
So I think we're still reviewing kind of our final COVID protocols, but it appears that I think exclusively in the communities that we've talked to, people are moving in the direction of opening their pools for this summer season. So our attentions have been focused on conversations about how others are doing that, how that may impact us. And Penn can feel free to obviously jump in here. We have put out an ad, or will be putting out an ad shortly to put out a call for guards. As Penn and I talked about this about a week and a half ago, all bets are off unless we have enough people to staff the pool when it's open. So we first, before we can really make that educated decision, we need to see where we land and what our success can be in hiring guards for the summer season. If we can do that, we're sort of building incrementally with the assumption that we will open the pool. So we've built out some key timelines and dates by which decisions need to be made, and looking at those kinds of pieces. But I think I know just in conversation, some of the concerns that we had last year with respect to being able to safely train the guards and that interaction as a result of COVID and the situation we were in last year, people have adjusted and made accommodations that we feel like would allow us to be able to do that. And I don't know, Penn, if you have anything else you want to add at this point.
I'd be repeating a lot of that, but yeah, the biggest concern for last year was how do we safely train up our team with the current restrictions in social distancing. And we feel like we've got a pretty good solution in place, partnering with other communities and then internalizing some of the COVID safety measures, as well as the virtual element. There are a whole bunch of new training modules that were updated, significantly more robust, and can get our team up to a higher speed than they could previously. So in that regard, we feel we're in a better place, can safely certify our guards. We've got some key partnerships in place that we can leverage equipment that wouldn't be accessible to us financially, specifically full-size dummies when it comes to in-water rescues, since we can't utilize other guards in the water for those same rescues.
And we are talking with, we understand that one of our biggest challenges and things that we need to address will relate to the marlins, just because of the number of swimmers that they tend to have in a season. So I know we're pursuing conversations with them about modifications and really what the league is going to do overall. So hope to be able to come back to you very soon with kind of a recommended plan of action, both for the outdoor pool and for the summer camp program.
We just recently rescheduled a meeting with the Marlins, and hopefully they'll have some clarification on the MoCan Swim League too for March.
Well, I just want to say that your list of accomplishments is impressive, considering the year and what it was like. we've accomplished a lot, and you are to be congratulated as a staff on what you've been doing. It's really impressive. Thank you.
No, thank you.
Hopefully we can put some of that in the Mission magazine to kind of share with the community too.
Good
Or-
idea.
Yeah, and it is absolutely a we. I mean, it takes all of us, and it's good. I think I hope that everyone on the leadership team took the opportunity to read through and just remind themselves about. Sometimes we get really bogged down in the day-to-day, minutia of the projects, but it's good to take that step back.
Trent mentioning the magazine made me think that, Laura, it might be good too if it could get posted separately on the website instead of, as part of the packet, because that can be kind of a lot for people to dig through, so that people could just, really quickly check in on that list of accomplishments.
Yeah. Oh, I did forget to say one thing. We are looking at an upgrade to a new digital platform for the Mission magazine that will allow readers much better. The magazine is much easier to read on your phone or a tablet. It's very cumbersome right now. And so we're able, through the use of some additional digital advertising, we've been working with Metro Media to look at upgrading that platform. And I don't think we'll have it accomplished for the February issue of the magazine, but our hope will be that we'll have that in place for April, and the editorial board members were really excited when they saw the demo.
Quick question, and I don't want to belabor because we're getting late. I want to ask you, is there any way, without going through a ton of information, is there any way to gauge exactly what our costs look like in 2020 relative to what we spent on COVID materials, services, etc., versus what we did not pay in contracts, personnel? I know it's kind of apples and oranges, but I just kind of like to see where we balance one way or another. Several people were not hired and we didn't have programs running, but we spent money on between sanitizer and screens and things like that. Is there any way to get some basic concept of what we look like in 2020 relative to COVID?
Yes and no. The COVID expense is pretty easy to track because essentially, but for the time that, for example, the incident command team spends meeting on a weekly basis and some of those other types of things, the COVID costs are pretty clear. And we spent right at about that $302,000, but we got reimbursed for all of that, right? So we have a really clear sense of what we spent on masks and hand sanitizer and PPE and all of those kinds of things. And then all of the projects that were accomplished, the touchless fixtures, Clorox sprayers, all of those kinds of things. So we really do have, that snapshot, the other things that we do, relative to COVID, or the other impacts are going to be the squishier kinds of things to sort of see. But what I'm hopeful is that, and let me see if I can just pull this up. So if you'll take a look at the monthly financial report that I emailed out late today in anticipation of the work session, what I really was able to do here, and it just took being able to carve out the time to really sit down with the year-end budget reports, is I've given kind of the snapshot in the general fund of the 2020 budget, how we revised that 2020 budget when we put the 21 budget together, where the actuals came in, and then looking at the 21 adopted budget and where I think, starting to engage in the conversation, where I think we need to think about modifications, because I think we were not conservative enough in our revenue estimates. Generally, I can tell you in this report that the memo and the reports that came out today will tell you that we ended the year, we actually did better than our revised 2020 budget to the tune of about $640,000. what that means and so you'll be able to see kind of the bottom line impacts here. What that means is we only had to dip into that fund balance, that excess fund balance, to the tune of about $345,000, as opposed to the $1.3 million we thought might be necessary when we put the 2020 revised budget together. So
And this takes into consideration the potential loss of revenue, whether it be the pool, programs, et cetera, right? Okay.
So this what I tried to do is go back and show you the budget. So in each of those major revenue categories. So sales tax performance, sales tax saved the day, quite frankly, in 2020. Not only did it perform at the levels we anticipated in the revised budget, but it actually performed about 4% better overall than what our budget figures had been. So that was the driver. Property tax revenues were stable. Parks and Recreation revenues, we had planned for a 50% reduction in revenues. We saw overall a 68% reduction in revenues in Parks and Recreation. And in the memo, I've broken it down for you, totals for the community center, and then by each specific category type. So you can kind of see, memberships performed better than anything else in 2020, but memberships, rentals, programs, day passes, and then our summer camp program. That's the biggest area where I think we're going to need to make adjustments in 2021, because we had started to ramp those revenues back up to only about a 25% reduction. And so I've showed, and we can continue to talk about some of those revisions, because I think staying closer to that 50% target is much more realistic moving into 2021.
Okay.
Fines and forfeiture revenues, again, just kind of what the trends were. And then looking at expenses, budget to actual, we came in. So again, our expenses came in under what the revised projections were as well. And so, I mean, we've got work to do, but I know that we've had a really keen eye on, what's happening to that fund balance, and particularly the excess fund balance. We've absolutely ended the year, and you'll see a breakdown in this memo that will show you kind of the anticipated estimated fund balance at the end of 2020, which is 5.2 million. And then I've broken that out to show what the 25% council reserve will be, the funds that are committed to other projects, and then still showing about an unencumbered fund balance in the neighborhood of about $1.7 million. That number gets worse in 2021, which means we've got, but it allows us going into this this next budget process, I think, to really be able to more keenly focus where that is. So the more time I spend in the numbers, the more light that sort of is shed on, where we have opportunities and all that. So we'll look forward to kind of diving a lot more deeply into that.
Thank you, Laura.
Sure.
I'm worried about keeping the staff this late. I get real worried about you guys. You guys work so many hours anyway, so I appreciate that. Unless anybody has any comments, let's move into the department updates so we can get staff home for a while, please.
Could I ask just one thing?
Sure.
How have the other cities fared, Laura, in relationship to how we fared in the area?
I think very similarly, particularly with respect to sales tax performance. The community, those cities without a community center have not had some of the drain that we've had. So I think you'll see some that have even better budget performance than what we have. But it's, again, you go back to sort of how you're structured and where you're spending, where your revenues are coming from, and how your expenses are being, allocated.
Thank you. That's all.
Debbie, I had one final
Laura,
question.
go ahead, Sollie. Go ahead.
Sorry. Oh, just to see if we're tracking with NLC on the federal relief, in the hopes that if something passes this next week, that could be part of our budget conversations later this month too.
Yep.
Okay. Trent, do you have something?
Oh, no, I was fingers crossed to get some relief.
Okay, we'll need that. Laura, could you provide us with any department updates you have on the finance end of things?
I don't think I have anything other that's not included in your status update.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Okay, it is now 9:00 p.m. And with no further discussion, this concludes the meeting of the Finance Administration Committee. Again, this video will be made public on our website at www.missionks.org. Thank you, everyone.